Hello and welcome. This week we're going to be talking about Chapter 14, The Age of Exploration. So the first real question we have as far as exploration during this time period is why does it happen now and not in previous generations, decades, centuries, whatever the case may be? Some of the reasons why we see exploration during this time period. The first is a lot of works of fiction at this time period talk about faraway lands, talk about kingdoms, talk about specifically the wealth that can be gained from exploration. So even though these are works of fiction, they're not based on reality, it still sparks the imagination of many Europeans. People want to get in on this. They want to explore. They want to become wealthy. They want to become famous. They want to meet new people. Specifically, there's a legend that in Africa, there is a Christian kingdom ruled by a guy named Pester John. And again, the average European genuinely believes that Pester John exists. There is no actual historical person named that. There is no Christian kingdom in Africa that this is referencing. But again, these works of fiction become read so often that they're genuinely just believed by everyone. Now, there's also some works of nonfiction, such as the Diary of Marco Polo, which talked about his exploring parts of Asia, meeting Mongol emperors, Chinese ruling classes, whatever the case may be. So again, this helps to encourage people in Europe to want to explore. The idea of spreading religion is also going to be a major aspect of this. Again, we talked about in Chapter 13 the religious battles that are going on in Europe at that time. But again, they're going to be able to then use some of this religious fever to kind of spread this religion to other parts of the world. The conquistadors of Spain, again, were said to want to explore for God, glory, and then gold, although I would certainly argue that gold was probably at the top of their list. So again, we know maybe what their motivation was, but what are some other factors that allowed exploration to occur at this particular time? One thing is that European kingdoms finally were strong enough and had enough money that they didn't have to worry about internal conflicts, right? Kind of the religious wars had been solved by this point in time. The threat of Muslim invasions from the Ottoman Empire or something, all of that had been solved by this particular time period. So again, if you have all of your internal issues figured out, now you can start to do external things. So again, they're taking some of those resources away from fighting internal battles and being able to use them for exploration elsewhere. The other major thing that helps at this time is technology, specifically in sailing. The Portuguese are able to create a ship called the Carnival, and essentially this was a ship that allowed them the ability to sail into the wind. Again, if you're sailing and you can only go with the wind, there's really only one direction to go, and it makes it very difficult to travel, especially south, once you get near the equator. This new ship allowed for further exploration from land, allowed them to travel into the wind, allowed them to travel south of the equator. So again, this opens up a whole new world of exploration. The other thing we see getting created at this time are more accurate maps. Again, they're not going to be accurate in the sense that they don't know that there is a North and South America. But again, as far as laying out what Africa is going to look like, Asia, general distances between Europe and those places, these maps allow it a little bit easier access into the oceans and more likely to be successful on these explorations. So the first major country we're going to see exploring is going to be Portugal. And again, they're exploring the west coast of Africa. And again, every year they're getting a little bit farther, a little bit farther, a little bit farther south until they're then actually able to round the tip of Africa and get into the Indian Ocean. And again, they're going to sell up then the east coast of Africa. They're going to find India. Again, find is a relative term. There's obviously people living there. There's people trading there. But from a European perspective, they've now found a route to get from Europe to the Middle East, to Asia, without having to go over land. The first thing that they find is that there is wealth there, specifically in spices. Now, once a country like Portugal realizes that there is money to be made, all right, they're going to bring in the military, right? We got to set up forts. We have to protect our trade. And again, that's what the kind of the process we're going to see again and again and again. Spain is the next major country we see in this exploration. And again, the Spanish, specifically Christopher Columbus, are under the impression that they can get to Asia by simply selling east. Again, they don't know about the North and South America issue. So again, Christopher Columbus, 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. We all know that. So again, Columbus sets out to find Asia, but instead finds America. Now he's convinced he has in fact found Asia. He doesn't realize that he's found a completely separate continent at that time period. But again, once we establish that there is an America, once we establish that there is wealth to be had in this America, everyone's going to get in on this. There's going to be multiple Spanish missions. And again, most European countries are going to send over some form of exploration. Again, within a few short years, all of North and South America, coast-wise, has been explored. Continuing on, the next major name we see is Magellan. Again, Magellan is able to round the southern tip of South America and end up in the Pacific Ocean. Obviously, people have been in the Pacific Ocean coming from the different direction, but Magellan's the first one. Although he doesn't completely make it, he dies in the Philippines, but essentially the first person to make a transcontinental sailing voyage. And this really, once and for all, establishes the size of the Earth, right? We know the major continents. We have a general grasp of the size of the oceans and how far apart all of this stuff is going to be spread. So as we mentioned, the two major exploring countries at that time are Spain and Portugal, which have one major common characteristic, and that is the fact that they are both Catholic. So now you have the two predominant wealthy countries, both being Catholic, both literally being neighbors, and they don't necessarily like each other, right? They're exploring the same areas, they're trying to gain the same wealth, there is only so much wealth to be had. So this is when the Catholic Church is going to step in. They're going to sit down with the two rulers of the countries, and they're going to sign the Treaty of Torsal. And again, this kind of divides the earth, or what they know of the earth at that time, between these two particular countries. All right. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is while they are exploring these lands, there are people living there, and specifically looking at what happens in North and South America. So again, in North America, specifically Central America, we see that previous to European exploration, we have the Mayan Empire. That does die out on its own pre-European exploration, but that is being replaced by the Aztec Empire. Again, the Aztec Empire is extremely large, very complex, very modern by most standards. Again, lacking maybe some of the technology we see in Europe, but other than that, it's an incredibly large and complex society in which they live in. But the Aztec Empire is going to be conquered by Hernan Cortez. Now, there are a few reasons why the Spanish showing up are able to conquer such a large, complex society. The first and the most obvious thing would be guns, right? The Europeans have them, the natives don't. That's going to give you a huge advantage if you are fighting a war. The other thing to keep in mind is other native groups don't necessarily like being controlled by the Aztecs. Again, the Aztecs have been in charge. They've been telling them what to do. They've been making them essentially pay taxes. So this is their way of getting revenge. So again, a lot of these native groups are going to align themselves with the Spanish. The other major thing that the Spanish has, and what's going to be kind of the global killer, is going to be disease, right? They're going to bring European diseases with them. The natives have no immunity to these diseases, and huge portions of the population are going to be killed. The exact same thing happens in South America. The predominant empire down there is the Incas. Again, the exact same thing happens with a guy named Francisco Pizarro, who's going to show up, bring smallpox with him, and literally lays waste to the population and makes it very easy for the Spanish to take over. So speaking of disease, specifically about 30 to 40% of local populations are going to be killed out by disease alone. So again, not even war, conquest, anything like that. Simply disease is going to eliminate upwards of 40% in most communities. And the way that that kind of compounds itself is if you eliminate 40% of the population, now you don't have the farmers to harvest the crops, grow the crops. So then you lead to further starvation and an even larger loss of life within those particular communities. Now, the long-term issue of the diseases killing off all these local populations is they need people to work the mines that are found. They need people to create the plantations that are going to exist. So if there aren't local people to enslave anymore, they've all been killed off by disease, now you have to import your own slaves. And that's where we're going to get the African slave trade coming into play. The first ship is going to leave Africa and sail to the New World with a specific load of slaves by 1518. And again, there's going to be slavery throughout the New World for the next 300 plus years. Over the next 2 centuries, we're going to see the slave trade grow, and it really creates kind of a triangle of trade between the New and the Old World. Again, products are being produced and harvested in America by slave labor. Those products are then being taken to Europe and sold for cash. That cash and/or trinkets are then being taken to Africa, given to tribal leaders who are rounding up more slaves, Those slaves are being put on a ship and taken to the New World, and again, it just becomes a triangle of commerce and death, essentially. All told, about 10 million Africans are going to be forced into slavery during this time period. And again, that route that they're taking, rounded up in Africa, put on ships, brought to the New World, is what we're going to call the Middle Passage. And again, even just in transit, it's about a 10% death rate. So again, 10% of people that are put on ships in Africa do not even make it into the New World. All right, and obviously this is going to bring about some major interactions between people, right? And the first thing we're going to see is obviously the death and the forced removal of African people from their homeland. Again, that's kind of at the forefront. That's the worst thing that's going to happen because of this. It's going to lead to more wars in Africa. Again, once the Europeans have kind of sapped all the easily accessible slaves off of the coast, they have to continue to move further and further inland. You have African tribes warring with each other, trying to appease their European friends. So again, you're going to have lots of wars in Africa. So even the people that aren't being captured and sold into slavery, you're still going to have a huge death rate in Africa at this time. Again, major depopulation of specific regions of Africa. Even issues in Europe that we don't necessarily think about. Again, if you have this slave labor in the New World producing products at a much cheaper price, those products are then being sent back to Europe and being sold for a much cheaper price. It puts a lot of Europeans out of business, right? So again, even in our modern society, we see that exact same thing with outsourcing of labor. It's the exact same premise. All right, so again, a lot of Europeans are going to find themselves out of work because no one's buying their more expensive European-made products. Products made by slave labor in the New World are simply going to be cheaper. Now, by the time we get into the 17th century with exploration, we see kind of a shift in who the major players are. Again, Portugal, one of the first countries exploring, establishing things, it's simply too small. It never has the population. It never has the military power to hang on to those kind of colonies that they're setting up. And the Dutch really come in and take most of their possessions, followed then by the English. So again, the Portuguese are really going to be phased out as explorers during this time period. Other places that we see kind of further explored, maybe exploited, India is going to be a major change. Originally, the only actual British trading was done by just a simple company called the British East India Company. But as that company grows in power, as they get more money, as they get more resources, they get way more involved in the politics of India. And they essentially create their own military force. So there's a military made up of British citizens in India, but they're not the British military. This is just a private company that is doing things to further their own capitalistic ventures. China is going to begin to see European exploration. Now, originally the Chinese were able to kind of pick and choose when they traded with people, who they traded with, how they traded. Again, China was a very old, well-established empire. But as the empire of China begins to change, as the original empire kind of dies off and is replaced, Europeans definitely take advantage of this new weakness, and they really force their way into China and kind of exploit what goes on there. Japan is another example. Japan is found by the Portuguese in that fashion. The Portuguese kind of set up their own little trading places there. But again, because of the isolation area of Japan, Japan's able to kind of control their trade with Europeans. So again, you have the Portuguese there. The Portuguese are eventually removed, a little too pushy on the Christianity thing. The Dutch kind of take their place. But again, they're allowed only one base in all of Japan, and they're only allowed to trade from that base about 2 weeks out of every year. And again, because of the strong military background, because of the strength of the country, Japan is really able to limit how many Europeans show up. So what if you are in one of those countries and these Europeans show up? What is that going to mean for you? Obviously, the short answer is it's not going to turn out very well for you, right? We talked about the disease. We talked about the slavery enforcement, forced labor, all those different kinds of things. There are some different aspects, though, besides all the negatives. One is you're going to get access to more modern technology. Again, steel, guns, all of those different things that you didn't have in the New World, you are now going to have access to the more often you interact with Europeans. We're also going to see this mixing of culture, right? A lot of these, especially Spanish in the New World that are coming over, aren't coming over with a family. They aren't coming over with a wife, and they're very willing to marry native people. And we see this a lot, especially even in modern Mexican culture, kind of this mixing of Spanish and native ancestry. So again, that's certainly something that you're going to see going forward. The other major change you're going to see is this new ecology that's going to come about, right? there are some things that exist in the New World that didn't exist in Europe, and vice versa. So kind of trading plants, animals, all these different kinds of things. Again, you're getting access to new food sources, you're getting access to new wildlife, all those different kinds of things are certainly changing for you. And the biggest change is going to be religion. Again, while it might not have been at the forefront, most of these European explorers are coming with the idea of establishing religion in these new places. Now, this trading of products, of plants, animals, is what we call the Columbian Exchange. So again, you have things that only existed in Europe: horses, cows, wheat. All of these products are being brought over to the New World. Then you have things that only existed in the New World, things like potatoes, chocolate, corn. All right, so again, these products are now being brought back to Europe. And again, it completely changes how Europeans eat. It changes their diet. It changes what they like as far as things that are just enjoyable, like chocolate, right? So again, all of that is going to change what the New World and the Old World are going to look like. All right, one of the other downsides, if you are a European country, is that there's going to be a lot of inflation within your country. Again, you're bringing in goods at a much lower price. There might be competition for that. The competition is then going to raise those prices. And again, your normal, every average day European is going to be priced out of interacting or purchasing most of these goods that are coming in. The other major thing we see is that there's really a shift in which cities are predominant within Europe. Again, when Europe was only trading with itself, most of that was done via the river system of Europe, right? So the major countries or the major cities on the Danube, for example, right? Those are the major cities that people are coming in and out of, that goods are coming in and out of. But that's not the case anymore. Now the major cities of Europe are going to be ones that are on the coast, ones that ships can easily come in and out of the ocean to, right? So again, even which cities are predominant or which cities are the major trading posts are going to change during this time period. All right, economically speaking, we also see the rise of another capitalistic venture that we still see today, and that's the idea of the joint stock company. Again, the amount of money needed to mount these explorations of the New World, individual banks simply were never going to have that much money. And if you were a bank, it was extremely risky for you to put all of your money into that type of an adventure, right? If the ship sinks, if a storm comes up, if nothing is found, you've literally lost all your money. That's where the joint stock company comes into play. A joint stock company allows individual people to throw in some money. No one ever throws in so much that if it fails, you're going to be bankrupt. You're going to be broke, right? Everyone just puts in a little with the idea that if it is successful, everyone's going to get their money back and be able to reap the rewards. So again, you're buying stock in a company. That's exactly what a stock exchange is today. And again, we see this come about during this time period as well. You also have the idea of mercantilism, which continues to shape and protect their economies. Again, creating laws to try to encourage you to buy English products if you're English, to buy French products. We have these exact same laws in place today. The idea of buying American products. It's the exact same premise that we begin to see then. So again, this is really the reshaping of the world into a global economy, which is the exact same thing we see today. So again, make sure that you continue your readings of chapter 14 for the week. Make sure you do your post and take your quiz by the end of the week. Have a good day.